Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you how to paint a Night Lord's Chaos Space Marine for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. Now the Night Lords have an absolutely iconic colour scheme for Chaos Space Marines that looks fantastic on the battlefield, especially with all those lightning patterns on the armour, and in this video we're going to be showing you how to paint all of it in a very efficient manner. We hope you enjoy it and we'll see you at the desk. To paint a Night Lord's Chaos Space Marine, the first thing you need to do is to undercoat your miniatures, and for this particular colour scheme I'd recommend using Mechanicus Standard Grey as a starting point because it's a great undercoat for all the colours we're going to be using. I'm going to be starting out with that gold trim. Now because there's quite a lot of gold trim on this colour scheme, there's actually a very good argument for undercoating your model using Retributor Armour spray, but I've particularly chosen not to, and the reason is because Retributor Armour spray gives a very smooth finish to it, to which other paints can struggle to adhere to, in particular dark colours, just like that dark blue that fills the armour panels. So if you go for a Retributor Armour spray, you'll find that that stage takes a long time to do. On the other hand, if you go with a grey undercoat, you'll find that all the colours apply very nicely, and so in the long run this is quicker, even though it might seem a little bit strange to begin with. But anyway, we need to start out with that gold trim, and I'm going to be using some Retributor Armour for this. And we're doing this first of all because it's easier to roughly paint in the trim and then neatly apply the dark blue in the middle than it is the other way around. So again, this is a time-saving exercise doing it this way. So what you've got to do is get some of the paint onto your palette and thin it down with a touch of water as ever so it's nice and smooth. And to apply it, go for a larger brush that's good at base coating quickly. So here I'm using a monster brush from the Army Painter. And all you've got to do is start identifying all that gold trim and just blocking it out at this stage. And you will need 2 thin coats for this. Just make sure the first one's completely dry before you add the second. And at this stage, don't worry about other details because we'll neaten up as we go along. So just concentrate on making sure you get all that trim at this stage. And with all that gold applied, we can now move on to the next step, which is going to be one of the longest stages of painting this colour scheme, because now what we need to do is to block in that dark blue on all the armour panels. And there's no way around it, we just need to neatly do it one panel at a time. Now in Citadel's range, there is a colour called Night Lord's Blue, which is a very dark blue, but personally I prefer to use Kantor Blue for this. And the reason is because Night Lord's Blue is very, very dark, whereas Kantor Blue's got a bit more lustre to it. So I find it looks a little bit brighter on the tabletop and stands out a little bit more, but the choice really is yours. Whatever you choose, what you need to do is use this colour to block these areas out, and so to do so, I'm going to switch to my wet palette for a bit more control and go for a medium-sized brush. Here I'm using a regiment brush from the Army Painter. And what you need to do is, as ever, thin that paint down and just test it on the palette to make sure it's flowing smoothly from your brush, so you've got lots of control over it. And then it's a matter of just going through one panel at a time, blocking this colour in on those areas that we want to be blue. So for example, on the shoulder plate, we're looking at this flat area just here. As I get close to that gold, it's just a matter of being really careful, just taking your time, working up to that gold detail, just working your way around, just filling it out like this. And you will need 2 thin coats here, but just make sure you've got an even coat and an even finish on the colour before you move on to the next step. And there we are, the 2 main colours now blocked in, and we can move on to the next step, which is to apply a few more base coats before putting our first wash onto the miniature. And for this we need to start out with any details we want to be black, for which Corvus Black is a great colour to use. After that, if you want any details to be red, you should pick them out using some Khorne Red. Finally, there's a silver to do, and for this we need a dark silver, so here I'm going to use some Leadbelcher. But first we need that Corvus Black, and to apply it I'm once again going to be using that regiment brush, but just change brush as you need to depending on the detail you're doing, because there's quite a few bits to pick out just here. They're all small parts, but they're scattered all across the miniature. So once you're ready, what you're looking for first of all is any joints in the armour. So for example, on the back of the leg just here, I'm looking at running the colour into these parts along there. But also you need to keep an eye out for any leather details, such as the belt along here and any holsters, anything like that. Also on the weapons, there'll be a black casing, in which case for the bolter we need to look at doing this kind of area around here, so all along the top of it. And if you can see the ammo feed, like in this one, also look for the links in it, so this kind of area going along here. In addition, if there are any ridged cables, look out for them too, for example these ones on the helmet. Next up we need some Khorne Red, and this is mainly for any fabric on the miniature. So for example in this case we've got the loincloth down here, but also if you want to you can use this to break up the colours and some of the cables, especially where there's bundles of them. So for example in this miniature I'm picking out the smooth cables on the helmet around about here, just really neatly. And finally, we're ready to base coat all the silver details using Leadbelcher. And these parts are scattered all across the miniature, so just take your time looking around to make sure you catch them all. For example, these silver parts on the weapons just here, but also things like grenades like this one down here, and also all the vents and things that appear on the backpack. With all those colours now applied, we're ready for the first wash on the miniature, and everything we put on there so far can benefit from just one colour. What we need is a black wash, so here I'm going to be using some Nuln Oil. And to apply it, go for a larger brush that can cover large areas quickly, so I'm back to use my monster brush just here. And all you got to do is just get some of this ready, and I like to draw it from a palette to control exactly how much I'm putting on at once, but you could go straight from the pot if you wanted to. Just bear in mind what you need to do as you're applying this is keep an eye out for it pooling and collecting too much in any one particular area. So for example, if I just start on this leg, all I'm looking to do is to apply a coat of it all over the miniature, and you can see I started with a blob there, but I'm moving it around to cover a large area like this so it settles in the recessed detail and doesn't blob up too much in any one particular area. Instead, it just gives that definition between the different colours as it runs into those recesses. Now what you really need to look out for if you do apply too much is this sort of thing happening, like a big blob there like that on that little trail of bullets. Now if that happens, if it dries like that, it'll look a little bit horrible. So if you spot that happening, just move away the excess like that and redistribute it elsewhere around the miniature so it's a little bit more even. Now once you have applied this all over the model, it'll take a bit of time to dry because there's so much of it, so I'd recommend leaving the miniature for about an hour before you move on to the next step. Once that wash is completely dry, we're then ready for the next step, which is to pick out any bone details on the miniature. So in the case of this, we've got the horns and also some random kind of teeth that are on the armour, almost growing out of it like a weird chaos mutation. Now you might be wondering why we didn't just do this earlier and wash it black along with everything else, but that's because for a proper effect for bone details, you really need a brown wash to give it a slightly more natural finish. So that's why we separated it here. Even on this Chaos Space Marine, there isn't that much bone. On some Chaos miniatures, there's quite a lot, so it is important to keep it separate. But what we need for this is some Zandri Dust, and to wash it we need a dark brown, so here I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade. But first we need that base coat of Zandri Dust, and to apply it I'm still going to be using that regiment brush, and with this all we've got to do is pick out those bone details. So I just need a small amount prepared, and then we just got to start locating them, and of course the horns are the really obvious ones here, so we just need to paint the kind of ridges that we've got going along here, just being really careful around that gold. But also, as I mentioned, keep an eye out for all those mutations. For example, this kind of tooth we've got growing out the armour just down here. With that base coat done, you're then ready to apply Agrax Earthshade over these bone details, and be careful not to put on too much at once because we just want to keep it focused only on those bone details. And with that, all the details have been base coated and washed, so now we can move on to the next step, which is to do a little bit of layering just to clean up a few details before we move on to highlighting the miniature. And for this, what we need to do is first of all return to the blue, so here we need some Kantor Blue, followed by going back to the red, and here we're going to be using Khorne Red once more. But first of all, we need that Kantor Blue, and remember, if you've chosen to go for Night Lord's Blue instead, you'll want to go to that instead, whatever it was that you started for that blue armour in the first place. But this time when applying it, we're looking to be quite controlled and only paint it onto the kind of middle of the flat areas, really, going up to any sharp edges, but avoiding the recesses where it meets things like the trim. So, for example, if we take a look at one of the leg pieces around here, you can see we've got that gold trim going all the way around. So what we're looking to do is focus on this kind of murky kind of finish we've got slightly on the middle, just here from that black wash. So we're looking at just applying it into the middle like that, not going quite into the corners, because this way we get a nice neat blue in those areas whilst retaining the definition from the wash. So all you need to do now is just take your time working your way around the miniature, always looking for these kind of flat areas like this, and just gently applying a thin layer onto these parts. I've finished applying that layer, and you can see now the blue is looking much neater, but we need to do the same thing on the red for this kind of loincloth we've got down here. So it's back to Khorne Red, and with this what we're looking to do is much the same thing, only following the direction of the fabrics, going all the way down like this, looking for deeper recesses and creases, such as this one just here, leaving it dark in the deepest area, and just applying this onto the raised parts next to it. So for example, just along here. And with that, the layering is complete and the Night Lord looks great. And in fact, if you want to, he's just about ready for the battlefield. You could just paint in the eyes, add the transfers, do the base, and then you're ready to go. But if you want your miniatures to really pop on the battlefield, then what you need to do is some highlights. And that's what we're going to start doing now, starting with all of that gold trim. And the colour we need for this is Liberator Gold. Now on Space Marine armour like this, and Chaos Space Marine armour 2, what we need to do is some edge highlighting to help those edges pop. And to do this, what you need to do is go for a smaller brush with a fine tip on it. And I'm using a small airbrush from Citadel here. And doing this kind of technique is really all about getting the paint prepared correctly. So on your palette, what you need to do is to add some water to it, just gradually bringing it into the mix there, and just testing it and adjusting it so that it flows easily from your brush. And there's kind of a sweet spot where it's going to flow well from your brush, but not go out of control. And the way to test that is just having a go at painting some lines on the palette. So for example, if I just start running my brush along like that, you can see some lines catching there. That's looking pretty good. I'm able to get some fine lines that go on for quite some time, but it's not running out of control. So I'm happy with that, and so I'm ready to start applying it. And what we need to do is to look for all the hard edges on the gold details and pick them out. And wherever possible, I'm actually going to use the side of the brush, which on Chaos Marines is great because you can see these edges really stand out. So for example, on this shoulder pad trim, I'm just going to approach using the side of my brush like that and just skim along. And there we go, just running along that edge, and you can see the colour catches it and gives a nice highlight going all the way around. And essentially what you do is carry on doing this all the way around these edges, turning the model as you need to so that your dominant hand that's holding the brush is nice and comfortable and allows you to access those areas. So all the way around there like that. Now, sometimes you won't quite be able to reach these parts using the side of your brush because the detail will be too shallow, in which case what you need to do is to use a tip. So for example, on the inner part where it meets that blue just there, in this case what you need to do is just use the tip of the brush to paint lines following along that edge. Now the easiest way to do this is to really brace your hands so you're nice and steady. You can see how my hands are touching like that. And paint in a downward motion. So you're looking down the length of the brush and just going down like this, because here you can clearly see where you've kind of put the bristles so you can follow along those edges. And like with that edge highlighting technique using the side of the brush, just turn the model as you need to so you're nice and comfortable and follow those edges all the way around. So now it's just a matter of taking your time going all the way around the miniature doing this, and this is the longest stage of painting Chaos Space Marines, but it's one that really makes them stand out on the battlefield. So just take your time, have some patience and be as neat as you can, and you'll get a great result. And there we are, the highlight's been applied to the gold, so now we can move on to highlighting all the blue detail. And here I'm going to start out with some Alaitoc Blue, but after that we're going to move on to Hoeth Blue. And this is for a fine highlight, which is optional. It's the kind of thing I normally just reserve for characters to help them stand out a little bit more. But first of all, we need Alaitoc Blue, and this is going to be, again, an edge highlight applied using that small layer brush once more. And the application is exactly the same as what we just did on the gold. The first thing to do is to make sure the paint's thinned down correctly and flowing well from the brush, but not so much that it's flowing out of control. You always just test it on your palette just to see how it's behaving. That's looking pretty good to me, so I'm happy with that. And what we're looking to do is, wherever possible, using the side of the brush, such as on the shoulder pad just here, angling the model so you can approach using the side of it to skim along those sharper edges, so along there, which sometimes even means turning the model right upside down so you can reach those parts. But whatever you need to do, just to be comfortable. But whenever you can't do that, instead it's time to use the tip of your brush. For example, on the elbow pad here, this is quite a shallow angle, so I'm going to use the tip of the brush instead. And with this, just paint downwards towards yourself so you can get a nice clean line across these top edges. With that done, we can now move on to the optional extra edge highlight using Hoeth Blue. And if you decide to go for this, what we're looking for is the very sharpest corners. For example, this one just here, and just apply a small amount of this close to it. So just there and just there, just focusing it towards that part to make it stand out just a little bit more. And with that, the blue is complete, and now we can move on to finishing off all the bone details too. And for this, once again, we need two colours, starting out with some Ushabti Bone, and then a fine highlight of Screaming Skull to take it a bit further. But first we need that Ushabti Bone, and to apply it once again, I'm going to use the small layer brush. And with this, what we're looking to do is to apply a thin coat onto the bones, but leaving the darker colours kind of showing towards the base of them or the recessed area. So it depends which kind of shape of bone you're doing here. For example, if we look at that kind of tooth that we got growing out the armour for an area like this, what we want to do is to paint it towards the tip of it. So that means kind of applying it towards the tip like that and not going all the way down to the base. So this way it gets a little bit darker the further down you go. Now when it comes to these horns instead, these ridged ones, instead just use the side of your brush and skim across that texture so that the brush just catches the raised area so that you stay darker in the recessed parts. And then with that done, we can move on to a fine highlight using Screaming Skull. And with this, for these kind of teeth, all you got to do is just put a little bit just at the very end, just like that, to give the impression of sharpness. And on these sorts of horns, use the side of your brush and just skim along the outer edge towards the top of each one. And there we are, that detail is now complete as well, and we can move on to highlighting 3 more features on the miniature before we move on to the final details. And for this, what we need first is some Stormhost Silver to highlight all those silver details. After that, we need a little bit of Evilson Scarlet to highlight the red, and then finally some Mechanicus Standard Grey, and this will be to highlight all those black details. But first we need Stormhost Silver, and to apply it, once again, I'm going for that small layer brush, because once again here, what we're looking to do is an edge highlight. So just like in those previous times, make sure you get that paint thinned down just to that sweet spot where it's flowing well, but not too much out of the brush that you lose control of it. And once you've found it, it's a matter of just looking for all those edges on the silver details, and wherever possible, using the side of your brush to pick them out. So for example, on the backpack, I'm looking at just angling my brush just like that, so I can skim along it just to pick out those edges along there. Next up, we need some Evilson Scarlet for all the red fabric, and for this what we need to do first of all is go all the way around the outside edge, so this is kind of an edge highlight following all the way around, but also look for any creases and just pick out the tops of those as well. So for example, these ones along here, what we need to do is a highlight running down those, and this is kind of like that edge highlighting when we're using the tip of the brush. Just work your way down in that downward motion so that you get a nice highlight along those areas. In addition, if you've picked out any cables with this red, be sure to highlight those too. And to do that, all you need to do is apply just a little bit of a line across the top of each one. So for example, on this one on the helmet here, I'm looking at just running the colour along this part just there. And finally, we're ready to highlight all the black details using Mechanicus Standard Grey. And this is once again mostly edge highlighting, looking for those sharper edges and just skimming along using the side of the brush wherever possible, for example along the top of the bolter just here. But sometimes it'll be a bit tricky to do that. So in these cases, for example, these kind of ridged pipes we've got along here, instead use the tip of your brush and just follow along the raised texture. So in this case, it's just a matter of kind of flicking the brush along this part here. And with that, all those details are now highlighted, and we can move on to the final steps of painting the miniature. And the first part for this is optional, but it is one of those classic parts of Night Lords, and that is the lightning effect in their armour. And if you want to do this, what you'll need is some Lothern Blue, followed by a pure white, and here I'm going to use some matte white from the Army Painter. Now in addition, we're going to use this as setup for the eyes as well, still using matte white, but after that, we need some Blood Angels Red as well to get a glowing red eye effect. But first of all, we're going to do that lightning, and so Lothern Blue is the first colour we need here, and to apply it, definitely go for a small brush. I'm using my small airbrush once more. And with this, what we're essentially going to do is to paint some jagged straight lines, kind of working our way down some of the armour panels. And I'd recommend not doing this on every single panel because it can get a little bit too much. Instead, pick maybe 2 per Space Marine and just kind of change which ones you're doing. But to do it, all you got to do is set up the paint as if you were going to edge highlight, so just testing it on your palette so it's flowing well from your brush. There we go, that's pretty good. And with this, what we need to do is to do that sequence of jagged lines running down the armour. So I'm going to go for this shoulder pauldron just here. What I'm going to do is start up roughly this kind of corner here, and I'm just going to start freehanding just some straight lines, kind of just working my way down, not following any, not really thinking about it too much, just kind of jaggedly approaching all the way down like this, loosely keeping it together all the way down to the bottom. Now, part way down, it's a good idea to split it as well, so I'm going to go for about there, and then just start another line, working my way down like this. So you can see it's just a matter of kind of going all the way down to the bottom of the panel, and I'm going to do it on this one. And also for a second one, I'm going to do it on the side of the leg just down there, I think. I finished applying that pattern onto the shoulder, and I've also done it onto the leg down there as well, and so now I'm ready for some matte white. And with this, what we're looking to do is to kind of trace along the pattern, though not catching everywhere along it. And what we want is a slightly thinner line going kind of along the middle. So for example, along there, what I'm going to do is start up this point here, and then just kind of follow along so I get little sparks of white appearing in amongst that pattern. So you can see I'm not doing everywhere, I'm just sort of following along, just picking out some random little bits of white like that, just to get the effect of lightning running down the armour just there. Now, in addition with matte white at this stage, what we need to do is to paint it into the middle of the eye lenses. So that kind of raised part we got in the middle, all you need to do is just very carefully paint a white line across that area. So approach from the side like this and just run your brush along just to catch that raised area in the middle. And with that, the lightning effect is complete, and all you now need is some Blood Angels Red to finish off the eye lenses. And with this, all you need to do is just wash it into the whole area of the eye, so into the recess like that, so it kind of shows through that white in the middle, giving you that glowing effect. Now with this done, all you got to do is apply the transfer onto the shoulder pauldron and then base your miniature. And as ever, it's entirely up to you how you base your model, but for this one, I'm going to go for a desert base to be a nice contrast against such a dark colour scheme. And here we have the completed Night Lord's Chaos Space Marine, ready to terrorise the weakling servants of the Emperor. So whenever you're painting Chaos Space Marines in a more traditional manner like we did in this video, remember it's easier to paint all that trim first and then blocking the armour panels afterwards than it is doing it the other way around. In addition, if you decide to paint the lightning patterns onto the armour, remember this is all about getting the paint thinned correctly on your palette and making sure you don't have loads on your brush. So this way you can retain that control and get those fine lines. Anyway, have fun painting your Night Lords, and we'll see you all again very soon.